Welcome back to Bloody Besties with your hosts, Ruby Wilde
and Melissa May.
And this week, what topic did I give you, Melissa?
This week we are covering cannibalism.
Always a good time. Wait, is that a good time?
You have to tell me. If you're the one not getting munched on.
I mean,
it's pretty fun.
I just always feel like
Hannibal Lecter.
Well, I was thinking disease because I'm a scientist.
Okay.
But yeah. Okay, wait. I will ask a honest question.
Yes.
2 ways. 1, if you were to eat random meat from a person, would you eat it? Like a random, here's a piece of meat. Would you eat it?
If I knew it was a person.
No.
Oh.
Just a random person fed you a piece of meat.
At a restaurant. If I was at a restaurant and they said,
no,
hey,
not a restaurant. Like you go to someone's house.
Okay.
And they go, here's like a slice of meat. Yeah. What do you think?
I would try it.
Now, would you try it if they said, here's a piece of meat, it's human?
No.
I would.
No, you would not. There's questions you would be asking.
I mean, I'd be asking questions, like, not like, is it naturally sourced? But I don't know. Like, I feel, because I'm also that girl that tries anything once, any food once, I should say. Like, I've had chicken feet but I will not eat anything that is currently living. So, like, how they have, like, those live octopi.
Oh, yeah.
I won't do that.
So the Philippines and the Asian markets.
Anything that is still living, I will not eat. But I'll eat bugs. I don't care if they're dead. I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's to this date, that has been my limit. So I guess I shouldn't say, yeah, I would, because I've never been off. But
that's good. That's a good thing.
But anyway, back to, let's go with fun fact of cannibalism.
What kind of wine pairs best with human?
What?
Yeah, what kind of wine?
Okay, me being a wino, I would go with humans consider long pig, which would be a white meat, which would be like pork. So I'm going with a Pinot Grigio, although my first...
But pork isn't really white meat. They just say that in their advertisement.
I know, but I would have gone with Pinot Noir.
Okay, no, you would be wrong.
Rude.
This question was asked at a wine store by a man named Bill Schutt, a biologist at the American Museum of Natural History. The clerk turned and ran away, so he picked a nice Italian red. It was an Amarone. It worked out quite well, he said. Schutt went to that unusual dinner party as research for his new book called Cannibalism, A Perfectly Natural History. He found that the practice of eating the placenta is...
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's common in the animal kingdom,
no,
not among human cultures.
No.
So yeah, he went to this party and ate human placenta.
I guess that is cannibalism.
Yeah. That's not the texture I'd be going for if I was going to pick a slice of meat off a human. That's what I thought you were going to ask me is, what part of a human would you do if you had to pick? And I was like gearing up for that, but no, you went with a different question. What part of a human body would you pick if you had to?
Thighs.
Thighs. Okay.
Immediately thighs. They're just super muscly. It reminds me of steak.
Yeah.
What about you?
I wouldn't go for muscle because that would be too stringy. Like,
what do you think you eat on a cow?
They're not muscly like that. And on a cow, I eat the shoulders and the buttocks.
I'm not going to eat the butt.
But I would go maybe bicep.
That tick is reminding me of like an old school 8mm that's happening. So if you can hear this, it sounds like an 8mm happening in the background. All right. So knowing that that is the topic, it's not going to be any surprise where we end up. Don't worry. I have invested in some new boom mic stands for us. So hopefully it'll be a little bit less janky that we're looking at.
We're crashing into things over here.
We'll show you on our socials what we're working with. So again, once we start getting enough listeners per episode, we're going to launch some Patreon and be able to buy some better equipment. But for now, we're going to go ahead and start with December 11th or 14th of 1825 when the alarm sounded at Lostinston Ward. I'm sorry.
December or 14th? 11th or 14th?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Two sources reported different dates.
Because it's 1825. Yeah. All right. So the alarm sounded at Launceston Wash House.
I'm dead.
Launceston Watch House in the north of Van Diemen's Land. The name was changed to Tasmania in 1856. And before we go any further, I should explain what this alarm was and, well, why it was alarming. So Van Diemen's Land was the name of an island in Tasmania in Australia at this time. It was named after Anthony van Diemen, who was the Governor General of Dutch East Indies. It became a transportation island housing 73,000 convicts at the time that it was operational. The male prisoners were assigned to labor, the others were settlers on the island, or they were assigned to public works. Transportation was stopped in 1852, and the island as a convict colony wrapped up in 1862 with just over 1,000 convicts being left. All right, so all of that. Everything started with the transportation, which could take months or years, depending on where they were leaving from and the stops along the way. So upon arrival to the island, they were taken to the board, which is, they said what their occupation was, what they had experience in. So you walk into the place, you're like, I'm an electrician. They're like, okay, we'll put you on electricity. Well, the men would go to the prison barracks and the women to the Cascade Female Factory. And before 1840, the prisoners actually were assigned to they were assigned to private individuals, basically as slaves. Yeah. So very long story short, let us know if you want a deeper dive into this in the following episodes, but for now, we're going to leave it there. While there were convicts, there were reports of the punishments for various types of crimes. For example, Anne Mason, who was assigned as a servant to Mr. J.H. Reebley, she was charged with neglect of duty and insolence to her mistress and ordered to be confined on bread and water for 1 week. Then she was sent to work in a factory in Georgetown. Patrick Doherty was sentenced for absenting himself from his barracks, so going AWOL. And for that, he was given 25 lashes. John Dunn, assigned servant to Mr. William Basham, was accused of being insolent, so talking back to his master. And for that, he was given 25 lashes. So the watch houses were built to prevent overnight burglaries of poultry, garden vegetables, and breaking and entering into the free people's home that were in Van Diemen's Land. They started with military guards, which then branched into civilians. The watch houses were to house those who had committed infractions, and they were being held until they could be presented to the magistrate. So it was for like the lesser offenders, and they were like, you haven't actually been charged with anything, so let's go ahead and pop you here, and you could just watch the free people. Now we understand why the alarm was disconcerting, as it meant that there had been prison escape. And this was Thomas Jeffries, John Perry, John Hopkins, and Edward Russell. And who were these men and why was there worry? So let's start with John Perry, who was born in 1803. His listed occupation and convict records was a bricklayer. He was found guilty of burglary or housebreaking and larceny, which was a felony in Surrey. He was sentenced to life December of 1822. James Hopkins was born 1805. He was a stocking weaver and was found guilty of robbery in Gloucester. And he was sentenced to life of transportation in 1821 at the age of 15.
Wow.
Notably, his occupation was listed as laborer, and when he arrived on board on the Claudine in August of that year, he had already tried to flee in January 1825, and he was caught, causing him to be sentenced to 50 lashes. Edward Russell was sentenced to life for burglary, and he had arrived on the island September of 1825 on board the ship the Medina. He was the only one who lost a vote. We'll come back to that because he died while he was on the road. That's all I could find on the escapees, except for Thomas Jeffries, who was a well-documented man. We'll put it that way. He was born around 1791 in Bristol, Gloucester, England. He was a butcher, to a butcher. He did not make it long in school and instead chose to go the military. He was a teen serving in the Navy for 3 to 5 years, and he was on the warship Achille before going AWOL. Some said that he tried the army after that, but that was only a couple of articles. The profession he finally settled on was being a thief, and his family was not exempt from being the victims of his crimes. After stealing from his family enough, had to move on to strangers, and that's what led him down the path to our story that we're talking about today. He, along with his gang, would rob nearby farmers, and it was here that some of these historical cases, there's no consistent reporting of the crimes and the infamous criminals, but basically, it states that his gang killed an elderly farmer for 69 pounds. They decided to go out on a drinking binge. They were then arrested. And then in 1817, he was caught and tried for robbery, which ended with him being sentenced to transportation. Records show that his transportation started in 1819 on board the Prince Regent, where he used his previous Navy experience to be allowed out of his change to work as the crew until the ship arrived in New South Wales, Australia. When he arrived, January 1820, his occupation was listed as a painter and a glazier, and his tattoos were documented as being a castle, hearts, darts, flower pot, and others.
That's random.
Very. Okay. But then again, we both have some random. Come on.
Not as many as you do, but he probably did his experiences and put them on his body.
You some random stuff too.
Most of them are like sleeves and part of a theme. I don't have an arm dedicated to random stuff like you do.
I have a
leg dedicated to random stuff.
I do. I call it my catch-all leg.
Catch-all, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't have that.
I have a catch-all leg, and that's like those random tattoos that don't really go with anything else. And so you put them there.
I don't have that.
You need to have. Okay, our matching tattoo. Where are you going to put that?
That's the problem. I don't know where.
You need to have a catch-all.
I don't. I need it to not hit the sun because it's going to be yellow.
Mm-hmm.
And the ribs is the only place I was thinking, but I'm so terrified of my ribs.
Mine's going on my catch-all. My husband's, I know, is going on his catch-all. Wait, does your husband have a catch-all?
No.
Y'all got to think about that.
No catch-alls.
Let us know in socials if you have a catch-all. Like the place that every other tattoo that you get goes in one spot, except for this one that you're just like, I don't know where to put it.
And then you eventually link them together by like what, spider webs or space? You got to make a sleeve out of your leg.
As of right now, they all just kind of sit there.
They all merge together.
They do.
Blob.
Not quite the
Not yet.
Blobulin.
They'll be blob when you're 60.
Right? All right. So he's got these tattoos, and we again have a wobbly account of his time from 1820 to 1823. But either way, it seemed to be a problem child for the system because he was appointed as an overseer of the work gang, and after a prisoner narked on him for attempting an escape, he tried to stab Chief Constable George Lawson, and for that he was sentenced to 1 year at the previously mentioned Muckey Harbor Penal Station. After that stint, he made his way to Launceston in February 1825, and while there, he was appointed as a flagellator. So
Stop it.
he was the whipper.
Oh, not
What did you guys?
flatulence.
Flagellator.
That's what
What, you thought that he was supposed to fart on people? Whip people. He's a whipper.
Why is it called that?
I don't know why it's called a flagellator. I'm gonna have to Google. You Google that while I keep going. All right. But again, he just couldn't obey himself. And so, aside from taking delight in the punishment of his fellow prisoners, he was fined for being a drunk. And on August 25th, Miss Elizabeth Jessup had the unfortune of encountering Thomas. She had been called to a watch house by him, where he then locked her in a cell and tried to give her alcohol. He undressed himself and said that he would let her out in the morning, according to a witness. For this act, he was fined half his salary. Why he was making his salary as a prisoner, who knows? And this was not an isolated incident because he was known to mistreat many women. Thomas, John, Edward, and James were set to escape the night of the 11th, but police had caught word of the attempt being made, and they head out. They saw that the police in the cards were waiting for them, heard shots, and took the opportunity to run off to the brush. During their escape, the supplies that Thomas had packed had been dropped, so they needed to restock. They started at the hut that belonged to, quote unquote, the Springs, and that was around 13 kilometers south of the prison. There were 2 men present that they robbed at gunpoint. They stole flour, a musket, and ammunition. They had become bushrangers, which was a term applied to escaped convicts who took refuge in the bush to hide and escape their crimes. And usually that was while they were committing armed robberies. 2 days later, they hit Captain Andrew Barclay's home in South Esk River, and that's an area that we call Perth. Again, there were 2 people present, so they robbed him, took him captive, and they didn't let him go until they were done robbing him. And during more robberies in the area, it's noted that James Hopkins left their company for no recorded reason. Now, it's around this time at Christmas that they had more captives that were carrying their loot. They came across the 2 men with firearms. Jeffrey ordered them to drop their weapons. One took off running, so Thomas fired. This wounded one of the men, and Thomas claimed that he was drunk and abusive, so Edward was the one to come up behind him and kill him. He is noted as being Sutherland's man, as it was near Sutherland's house, and he was never named in records. If you want to keep track, this is murder number 1 that's credited to Thomas. The robberies and captive catching continued until they came across a hut of a settler named Bernard, who told the fugitives that it was only he and his horse, Breaker, at home at the time. The crew had intended to rob the hut, and then Thomas changed his mind. They came across another man who was cutting down trees, Samuel Russell, and when approached, he told them that the only people home were he, his master, and his mistress, and that was John and Elizabeth Tibbs. They bound his hands and called out to the occupants. The couple came out along with their infant, and they were ordered to join everyone as they moved toward, quote unquote, Mount Direction. And while on this trail, they ran across William Franklin, who was driving Mr. Bernard's cart, and another man named Isaac Beachy, who was a stockkeeper for Mr. Basham. Now, here's where things get a tiny bit confusing because from what I could piece together, John and Edward tied up Isaac and John Tibbs, and Elizabeth and the baby were with them. And while that was happening, Thomas took everyone else away. According to John Tibbs, because he's the one that survived, he was ordered by the men to the side of a steep hill and tied up with Isaac. The fugitives demanded that the prisoners' names, like they ordered them, they dropped to their knees, they prayed. They basically were like, "Who are you?" Tormenting them, if you will.
Or interrogating.
Yeah, but like no need for interrogation because it's not.
They know who they are.
Yeah. So the stockman dropped to his knees and was shot for his efforts, and Tibbs stayed on his feet. For this, he was shot in the neck by John Perry, and then he faked being dead and chucked himself down a hill. Yeah. So he broke a lot of bones in the process, but he stayed alive.
Wow.
Now, John followed him, hit him with the butt of the musket, but Tibbs was able to break free of his bindings and flee, and able to get help for everyone that was still in the company of these men. Now, the murder of Isaac is now number 2, but not technically Thomas. John and Edward rejoined Thomas and his captors along with Elizabeth and the baby, but when Elizabeth was not keeping up to Thomas's satisfaction, he did something unthinkable, and I'm not going to go into any details. They are listed. He killed the baby. I will not put that image into your head.
Thank you.
The baby was found January 7th, but not before animal activity had occurred. Elizabeth, at the tender age of 18 and possibly having been sexually assaulted the night before, there is no official record, one way or the other, but both have been reported. She had been let go by the group the morning after her kidnapping on January 1st, and she told those that found her the captor was a man going by the name of Captain Jeffrey, wearing a kangaroo skin hat, a red waistcoat, and a black overcoat, keeping in mind that this is the dead of summer now, so the clothing should make him pretty identifiable. Though there was now a posse intent on tracking the trio of convicts down, they were able to stay on the run, and they were traveling to the unsettled northwest towards Georgetown January 11th, when Constable Magnus Backey or Barker, both were reported, was separated from his search party that had departed from Georgetown. He came across the fugitives, begged for mercy, and upon trekking a little with him, Thomas decided he didn't trust the man and shot him in the head. We're now at Thomas's murder number 4. The trio of John, Thomas, and Edward found themselves with no captives in the wild country and unable to rob anyone for sustenance. Because there was no one to rob, they became desperate. About 3 days in, so Jeffries told the men, the first to fall asleep would be the first shot, and the other 2 men would eat him. Well, as alluded earlier, the one to fall asleep first was Edward Russell. He was shot by John Perry without ever waking. Murder number 5. Again credited to Thomas. Though allegedly he was not the one to kill Edward, they stated that they were able to obtain about 8 pounds or 3.6 kilograms of meat off the man.
Jeez.
They then proceeded to cook and eat their bounty, and that sustained them until they found their next hut, where they found more provisions. This, however, did not stop them from eating Edward, because they just cut and cooked him up along with their mutton. Yeah. Thomas and John became separated on the night around the 20th because John had gone to grab water and got lost. Let us not forget James Hopkins, who had parted ways with the party before the cannibalism took place. He was the first to be captured on January 21st by a soldier named McQueen, as he came across the sleeping and unarmed James. Thomas was captured the following day when a posse had been lying in wait. Thomas surrendered without being shot, without a shot having been fired, having called for quarter, which basically means mercy. All was not calm, however, as he was marched to jail back in Launceston, as the people wanted his head. The reason we all know that that happened on the run is because he confessed to it all, including the murder of the baby. Yeah. John Perry was found 9 days after Thomas because he was robbing the hut, winding near Launceston, so he basically made a big old circle. When he came across the Leith's farm, 2 servants spotted him and he took off running. The servants, John Spong and Francis Barrett, were able to track him down and told him to drop his musket or he would be given no quarter, aka mercy. He surrendered and was brought back to jail. So now with the 3 remaining fugitives, John Hopkins, James Perry, and Thomas Jeffries, they were all found guilty of the willful murder of Elizabeth and John's baby and were sentenced to hang. Aside from those wounded, Thomas was credited with the 5 murders. John Hopkins had his sentence commuted to life of transportation on the day of his execution, and he had not been with the group when they'd killed the baby. He was sent to Norfolk Island in 1827, fled again in 1833, and there's no account of what happened after except that he's listed as dead in 1833. But I also read a ticket of leave that was granted July 1840 to a man named James Hopkins, so do with that what you will. because it's kind of a common name. The hanging of Thomas and James was carried out May of 1826 in Hobart Jail. Thomas gave last statement by way of Mr. Bedford, quote, "The unhappy man Jeffreys, now before you on the verge of eternity, desires me to state that he attributes all of the crimes to which he is committed and to which have brought him to his present and awful state to the abhorrent vice of drunkenness. He acknowledges the whole of his crimes with which he has been charged and implores all of you to take warning by him and avoid the commission of the sin of drunkenness, which infallibly leads on to all other crimes." I call bullshit because he was just looking for absolution and an excuse, and that's just my opinion. The Cannibalism of Edward Russell by John and Thomas have them in a league with another cannibal from Van Diemen's Land called Alexander Pierce, which I could not resist giving you a little bloody brief. All right, so I'm just going to cruise right through this one, possibly skip over some of the more pertinent details because it's brief. So Alexander was born in Ireland in 1790, transported to Van Diemen's Land in 1819 for stealing 6 pairs of shoes. He was sentenced to 7 years and arrived on the Castle Forbes in January 1820. He was a menace, having been lashed for embezzling turkeys and ducks. Yeah, because hot commodities.
Food.
He was also lashed for being a drunk and disorderly and from being absent from his lodging, stealing a wheelbarrow, and eventually was sentenced to 6 months in the jail gang. He escaped in 1822, only to be recaptured, and he was then sent to the tougher Sarah Island in Macquarie Harbor. Sarah Island is known as the prison of last resort for those who could not behave themselves. There was little food, leading to numerous deaths, starvation, and disease. And if you thought the main prison was bad, you would be wrong. It was so crowded that the prisoners had to sleep on their sides at night so they could all fit in cells. It was isolated, it was secluded, it was near impossible for anyone to attempt to escape. All the convicts we will be taking about have been transported for theft except for Dalton. And keep in mind, I will just let you know where they all were, or where they were at Marquis Harbor, and not everything happened while they were imprisoned, which all of the following had multiple infractions. Alexander Dalton was transported for his court-martial that he received in Gibraltar in 1818, sent to prison for perjury. Thomas Bowden, sent to prison for attacking Mr. Reason and stealing from him. William Kenley, attempting to flee the prisoner's house in Georgetown. Edward Brown, stealing 2 shirts from his master's home and was to stay there for 5 years. Robert Greenhill, 150 lashes for absconding, stealing, carrying away a schooner that didn't belong to him. Matthew Travers, same reason as Greenhill. And finally, John Mather, there for perjury of a forged note. The escape happened when the men were working in Marquis Harbor lodging, and they overpowered the overseer. They grabbed a boat, took off, but someone on Sarah Island saw them and sounded the alarm. They returned to the land and took off into the bush. I'm just going to use last names this round because it gets confusing. Greenhill had an axe, so he became the leader. Person with the biggest tool might as well become the leader. It took 15 days before they decided to draw lots for who would be eaten. Yeah. Started with Bodenham. Bodenham? Yeah. Started with Bodenham, and Greenhill killed him with the axe. Dalton, Kenley, and Brown all got scared and fled. But according to the record, none of them made it back because they all, quote unquote, died from exhaustion. Greenhill teamed up with Travers and planned to kill either Mathers or Pierce. Mathers became the victim. Travers was then bit by a snake, and after 5 days with no recovery, he was killed by Greenhill. It was now just Greenhill and Pierce, and even though Greenhill was armed, Pierce won the final confrontation, and he killed Greenhill and ate him. Eventually, he made it to a settlement and was arrested. He made it 113 days on the outside, and he admitted to becoming a cannibal while on the run. He was actually not believed and they thought that the others were free living as bushrangers. So he was sent back to Macquarie Harbor. So they were like, nah, you're just covering for them. You didn't actually eat them.
Ow.
November 1823, he left again with prisoner Thomas Cox, who was there after attempting to escape from Launceston before being caught. This time he was free for 10 days, which was enough time for him to kill and eat Cox.
God.
I'm sorry, that sentence was... I shouldn't have laughed.
Giggity.
Parts of his body were discovered secreted. Pierce still had parts of his body on him.
Oh.
He said he killed Cox when he found out that the man couldn't swim, and he was found guilty of murder in 1824 and was hanged at Hobart as well. He was dissected after his death, and his head was sent off with his skull now residing in the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And in 2016, there was a push to have the skull returned to Tasmania, but it does not appear as though that has happened as of the date of this recording. Again, I hope you enjoyed all of that on cannibalism.
That's fun to go see. Go see his skull, his head.
I'm down.
Is it like in
it's not like
preservatives?
The one... There's plenty of murderous heads that are out there, and I don't know if it's still on display for the public.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you go for some cannibalism. Well, hopefully you enjoyed that. And in the next episode, I don't even know what we're going to be bringing you. Stay tuned.
Bye, y'all.
The views and thoughts expressed in this podcast are ours alone and do not represent the thoughts or opinions of anyone else. The information presented is for general information purposes only. We are not liable for anything you do with this information.